Well, hi everybody. This is Ladan from Rating Research, also known as the Raid Observer, and I'm hosting another podcast where I've asked a number of folks to join me for a discussion this evening. Some of you may have listened to the call that we did back in December, where talked to several of the world's top-ranked guilds to discuss a number of issues early on in the Tier 13 race. At that time, we were still in the throes of the LFR ban, and there was an atmosphere of sort of tension on the raiding scene. So we sort of looked at that. This time, I've asked more representatives rather, from more guilds to look at these issues with me in a bit more depth, with a bit more perspective as well, but also to explore some of the other issues that have emerged as the race has continued, such as the overall issue of bugs and exploits, and how do you cope with that during new patch releases and in games in general. Also looking at the somewhat dramatic shift in rankings that have happened to date, and also looking at whether we as a rating community need to take more seriously what measures should be put in place to ensure that the race is both fair and ethical, and if that's even possible. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about tonight. I'm very happy to be joined by 7 guilds this time for our discussion. And I will say I'm really sorry that I had tried to actually contact a number of other guilds to have even more participation this evening, but I think probably just due to time issues and language barriers, we weren't able to get everyone involved, and which is why, unfortunately, our sort of fellow raiders in Korea on the Korean servers weren't able to be out there with us, but we really did want them to participate, and I do hope that we can do the calls with them in the future. So I'll quickly introduce our participants today. Via email response, we've got the Guild Stars, which is our world number 2 ranked Chinese raiding guild, and the comments being provided by their raid leader, Crusher. And the folks that are on the phone with me right now, I'll just kind of go through and ask them to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Absalom.
Hi, I'm Absalom. I'm one of the main tanks for Blood Legion, and I come from Toronto, Canada.
Arx?
Hey, I'm Arx from Finland. I play a multitude of healers in Paragon, and I also do a lot of the out-of-game stuff for the guild.
Right. Cika?
Hi, I'm Cika from Exodus. I'm an officer and raid leader, and I live in Ohio.
Grafarian?
Hey, I'm Grafarian. I'm the GM of Vodka, and I'm located in New York.
Dusk?
Hey all, I'm Dusk, Officer of Envy, and I'm located in Stockholm.
And Sko?
Hey guys, I'm the Guildmaster of Method. Let's go.
And he's located in Scotland.
That's right.
Just up the road from me. I'm in Durham in the United Kingdom as well, so in England. So anyway, great. Thanks, guys, for being with us. We'll just dive right into the questions. The first thing I wanted to look at was, in general, how the Tier 13 race went. Obviously, there's been some shifts in the rankings. Some of you went up, some of you went down. Some of that was impacted by other events that went on around the race, and so I just wanted to see how you're all doing. I'm going to start off with Arx. I'm going to put you on the spot. How was it for Paragon to go from the first rank spot down to the 4th rank spot?
I can't lie, it really sucked. I mean, we're definitely not happy with the result. But the way it ended up going with the LFR bans and Spine and Madness being as they were, I mean, I think we played reasonably well, but it didn't help really much this time.
Yeah. Sko, how about you guys? You also had a drop in your rankings from 2nd to 5th. How did that? How'd the guild take it?
Pretty bad. We were really pumped this time to go for world number 1, so obviously world number 5 is pretty far off that. But yeah, as Ark said, couldn't really hope for that much better with the ridiculous LFR bans and the gear removal, and then the Spine fight as well being such a joke.
Yeah, it's interesting too because, Grafarian, I had to pick on you guys next because Vodka wasn't, as a guild, didn't get hit as heavily. It wasn't affected by the bans, but you did actually also fall in your rankings as well. I mean, what would you attribute that to, and how did your guild respond?
Yeah, I mean, we were definitely looking to do a lot better than we did previously, and our guild was disappointed, but I think it was a combination of the difficulty of the fight and what the specific requirements were, and we certainly didn't play as well as we had hoped to, and so we landed where we landed, and we definitely are more motivated, I think, now to do better in the future.
Thanks. And Dusk, you guys actually had you've had a fairly dramatic year, I would say, because you moved up fairly dramatically into third place in tier 12. And then, although not as much of a drop from where you were in tier 11, you did go down about 10 spots. How was that for you? And, and other things that are going on right now, because I'll ask you about that a bit later. But in general, how did Envy feel about its position?
Given the circumstances in this tier, the ban, and much like what Sko just said, the retardation that was spine, the class stacking that was needed, I think we did okay. We took a little while to gear up a multitude of alts to actually kill it, but we did okay given the circumstances, I think.
Yeah, but of course it wasn't difficult for everybody as far as the final outcome. Some guilds actually improved their overall position. Probably most dramatically, I'd say, would be Exodus, and with Blood Legion doing fairly well as well. In fact, I'll start with you first, Cika. You guys, moved up quite nicely. You're now the second highest ranked US raiding guild. Did that surprise you? And I know, you've been very vocal about the effect of the ban on your guild, because you did participate in the call in December. Were you surprised and happy with that final result, and how did it affect your guild?
I really don't think we were surprised as much. We've had high rankings in the past, and we've kind of fell off since, Wrath a little bit. So it's good to kind of get back to where we think we should be. The bans themselves, it sucks losing a week of gear and practice on the 25-man version of Spine, but we felt that we did good, and we're kind of happy with our position, always looking to improve.
It's good. Yeah, that's nice to hear. And Absalom from Blood Legion, you guys, you did very well. You're third ranked in the world. And obviously you've been very verbal about your experiences earlier on as well during the race, but, we haven't really had a chance to hear from you all in this particular forum. How has it been for your guild to come in such a high position?
It's been great for us. We were probably one of the least affected guilds overall by the LFR ban. So we're pretty pleased with how we've been doing. There's been a bit of a growing shift within the guild itself to really push a lot harder during progression, and we're pleased with the results.
That's great. So something I just, I wondered about, and maybe this didn't affect like Vodka or Blood Legion as much, but perhaps the guilds that were affected by the LFR ban. What kinds of adjustments did you have to make midstream? I know some of you decided to form 10-man guilds just to kind of get through some of the earlier content and experience it, and others were sort of playing a bit of a waiting game. And Dusk, I'm going to put you on the spot first, because I'll admit, when I was following things along, I was a little bit puzzled by what Envy was doing and wasn't doing. And if you could just kind of explain a little bit about what your decision as a guild was to do during the LFR ban, and then how you got back into the race again to end where you did.
Well, the first reaction was, of course, huge disappointment, because people had taken vacation and juggled their lives around to participate in this said progress. But as we couldn't, it changed to some kind of anger and revenge motivational thingy-majingy, but we couldn't do anything but to wait and try to have our guys online when we actually could progress again.
So it sounds like the sort of myriad of emotions that really affected you. Did you worry at any point that it would be virtually impossible to kind of get back and going, get back on the horse, essentially? Did you ever worry about that as an officer?
Yeah, the moment the bans went live, we had most of our officers on the phones and figuring out whether, what's going to happen. Are people going to quit? And it was kind of a dramatic moment, but I guess we got through it, or however, nobody ended up quitting. It was just a motivational bump and disappointment, and a bit of a surprise how they actually ended up banning so many players.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of shock with various stages that definitely seemed to be coming through. So Go with method. So much had been built into gearing up for the race, and there's been that classic kind of rivalry between you guys and Paragon, and sort of how to get ready for it. And obviously, it all went pear-shaped essentially. How did you guys get back into it and finish? Fairly dramatic end there between you and Paragon being within minutes of each other in the fourth and fifth ranked spots.
Yeah, when we got the LFR ban, it really felt like all our preparation and everything had been wasted, like all those Fireland funds, blah blah blah, for the legendary staffs and so on. Like it really felt in the guild that we put like so much effort into preparing for this tier of content, and then just it was all wasted with the LFR bans. We had quite a few people taking time off work and time off their studies and stuff for the first like 1 to 2 weeks of progress, and then obviously the 8-day ban comes, and that time is just completely wasted. Like there wasn't anything to do. Play League of Legends, or pretty much I'll play a 10-man. We had like 5 or 6 characters on band that weren't involved in the LFR, and we had a couple of casual members as well. And we managed to get like some French guy's friend from another server to come across to our server as well. So we managed to like get a 10-man together. But I mean, it wasn't ideal. Bosses took a lot more pulls down than what they should have. We weren't exactly gearing up characters we were going to be using in 25-man either, which is pretty shit. But yeah, we got some experience from 10-man. But the problem was, like, the week that the Heroic Progress gets released, like 25-man, I actually had to basically go back to work a few days after it was released. So, like, even the madness kill that you were just referring to a second ago when Paragon took it 18 minutes before us, I mean, I don't know if I should say it or not, but I mean, I wasn't even in that raid, so no comment really. It's pretty shit altogether.
Yeah. Well, although, in a way it's nice to kind of hear that, because I think people assume they've got a perception of what you guys do with your schedules, and that most of you just sort of sitting around waiting for raid, but you all do have jobs, lives, schools, various things. Maybe it's a more unique schedule than most people have, but a lot of you do have to contend with the work paradigm, family obligations, and that. So yeah, that I'd heard that a lot actually, Scott. So I'm glad you shared that. And then, for Paragon, what did you guys do? I mean, I know, we talked about this in December as well. You're very good at contingency planning. Sort of one of your kind of fascinations as a group. And how did you guys recover? Because it didn't seem like it, aside from the fact that there was just time involved in the Christmas delay as well, that's another issue. But how was it for you guys, Alex?
Well, I think the guys actually summed it up pretty well. But the atmosphere in our guild, I'd say there was definitely disappointment, but immediately after that, we just saw it as another challenge to overcome. Kind of, we knew that we have to do something, and we started assembling the 10-man group, which actually took quite a lot of effort to come together with unofficial alts with other servers and calling old members to see if they still have a character they could help on and so forth. But I mean, we approached it quite calmly after the initial disappointment of being banned. So we did what we could.
Mm-hmm.
Just
So, okay, well, I've got to get into some of this because I think it's important. And the fact that there was a very strong reaction. And Absalom, I'm going to ask you about this. There was a very strong reaction, as we all remember now, to what was going on with the exploit related to the LFR use. And there was a very negative reaction. And the response by Blizzard was really, quite widespread and very strong. And I think on some level, if their desire had been to exact, at least I'm just saying this from my perspective, their desire had been to exact an effect that would alter the outcome as a form of punishment, then I would say that they've actually been quite successful. That's not to diminish the success of the raiding guilds that did do very well in the end result, but perhaps without all of this, the outcome could have been somewhat similar with some maybe less dramatic shifting. Absalom, I know your guild was very vocal about saying we were not involved in this. We opted to go a different route. We prepared in a different way. I'd really like to hear your thoughts about all of that and where the guild stands and all of that. And is there kind of what's the sort of general feeling about where you were as compared to the guilds that had to change their tune basically midstream? You guys didn't have to necessarily. So, how did that affect your guild and what do you think about what happened?
It's difficult because exploits in general, whether or not a guild is involved in them or whether a guild is not involved tend to polarize people completely. When we heard it was happening, it hadn't been hotfixed quite yet, and immediately there was a reaction from within the guild that we should capitalize on it and join and be a part of it as well, just so that we wouldn't be at a disadvantage going in to the week of heroics. Overall, we decided that we would just continue with our normal strategy of farming normal runs and then deal with the LFR situation later. And as a result, the reaction had already happened by the time we set foot in LFR. We generally felt like the bans were appropriate and fair. It's difficult in a competition like PvE because, you know, in a race where rules are broken, the team that breaks the rules is generally disqualified for that race. And unfortunately, it's not something that Blizzard can ever determine before content is completed. So we feel like what happened was sort of appropriate to the severity of the exploits that were taking place, especially with LFR, where the situation was pretty black and white, in which you could never receive loot from the same boss repeatedly in the history of WoW in general.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get into it a little bit later about the whole notion of how we navigate these sort of issues that do go into ethical areas. But I think it's really interesting. Cika, you guys had a different experience, but you know, you had to go through it. Now you've reflected on the outcome of those bans. I mean, how was it for your guild, and do you agree with what Absalom just said?
Yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, when we got banned, we kind of just laughed because it's just like typical. Like, we always get banned for some sort of exploit. Not saying that it's not our fault or whatever. I'm not trying to like reduce the blame, but it's just like typical Exodus fashion, banned for something. And it was kind of funny because we heard about it like 30 minutes before they hotfixed it. We went in there and did it like twice, and then the bans are really weird too. Like, they only banned like half the raid that was in there for doing it. So we kind of just said, whatever, you know, we're always used to this sort of disadvantage. So we just went in there and did a 10-man, see what we could do. So but yeah, we are the bad boys of raiding, so we're used to such stuff.
Yes, I've been jokingly throwing that around, the bad boys of raiding. It is interesting, though. I mean, there is a bit of a variation in how we feel about this, and I think sometimes, you know, people will take these things slightly more seriously. And I suppose it does need to be addressed when we start thinking about whether or not we can actually have a fair raiding race. If there's a race that could be fair, you know, what do we need to put into place to ensure that it's fair? And we did talk about this a little bit in December as well, but you know, things have changed even further since we got together in December. The rankings have shifted a fair bit. For example, we have far fewer. I did a little bit of a bit of number crunching about this. I'm going to bore you all with some details, but I did a kind of a snapshot look at tier 12 and tier 13, and this is just looking at strictly the top 52 ranked guilds. The reason I did 52 is at the time that was how many guilds are at 7 of 8 and higher, and that's both 10 and 25 man raiding guilds. In tier 12, there were 12 Korean server raiding guilds in the top 52. And in tier 13, there are 28. From Taiwan servers, there were 3 in tier 12, and in tier 13, there are now 5. In tier 12, there were 7 US server guilds in the top 52, and now there's only 4. But the most dramatic change is the EU raiding guilds. In tier 12, there were 30. Now in tier 13, there's only 15. But ironically, if you jump up to the groups that are actually in the very top 10 or 20, there's very little shifting in the top 25. But when you move down a bit lower, you're seeing this geographical shift. And the reason I bring that up is is that due to a number of things that changed mechanically and also content-wise in the months leading up to the race, and also due to the LFR ban that are now actually shifting geographically the sort of dominance of the raiding race and the raiding scene? Do you think that's actually happening? Is this just a fluke of this particular race, or do we need to take this seriously? And should we try and put in place, as well as we can with our own ability, measures to ensure that Tier 14 has a slightly different and perhaps quote-unquote fairer experience? I'm going to throw that one. I'm going to throw it to Grafarian first. What do you think about what I just said? And do you think there's what do you think it means, this fairly interesting shift?
Of course, you'd pick me for this question.
I know, don't you love me?
That's okay. You know what? It's there's so much to cover because it's an open-ended and big question. I feel like, but I think it's kind of coincidence that there's a geographical shift involved in this particular tier of rating. I think that overall, no matter what, that this tier is unique because they introduced a new feature in LFR. I think that a lot of people, if you were to survey amongst the top guilds, would say that this content is not as good as it has been in the past, and there's really a lot left to be desired. And so I think that it's more the game that's impacting all the guilds, more so than their geographic location. I think it's just the actual game itself that's making the game what it is, and that's why you see a lot of drop off even between guilds, because the game's just not what it could and should be, I feel like, and as a result of that, people either move to other games, lose interest, or are just not motivated to push through even content when it's really not even that challenging relative to some of the stuff we've seen in the past. And that's a big factor, I feel like, and hopefully something that they'll address in the future, because it feels like at least the game is kind of on a downturn, and I hope that that's not the case, because I really enjoy it still, and so hopefully they'll recognize that before it's too late almost, and we won't lose too many good guilds or too many good players in the process of that. And kind of to talk about the second part of your question a little bit, I guess, with regards to putting things in place to deal with all this, I think that that's a real challenge, and that's probably something that an overarching entity would have to do, like a ranking set like WoW Progress. They would have to put together all the rule sets and all the guns and kind of police everything, because it's just too challenging for guilds themselves to police everyone on such a large and global scale, I think.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and I do apologize. I know that was a big question that I threw at you. I know,
That's okay.
Absalom, do you want to add to that? Do you have anything to add?
Just very briefly, I think there are definitely multiple parts of that question, and at least with the North American rating scene, we've seen for some time now that there has been sort of like a downward trend where we've lost, over the past year or two, guilds like Fusion, Cuties Only, Juggernaut, Deus Vox. So I don't think it's surprising that there are fewer American guilds within the top 52. And obviously, I feel like what's happened right now with the Korea and EU shift is a welcome shift, in the sense of it's nice to see a more international mix of guilds that are in that top range. But I think also what was happening too was we found that when Kin Raiders had just defeated Spine, they had come out with a strategy guide about exactly how they did that, and detailing down to positioning, screenshots, and raid composition and all that sort of stuff. And so I'd be interested to see what the raid the rating guild breakdown is of the top 52 for the next tier if, let's say, a Korean guild wasn't in that top seat. It was all written in Korean, so we, did our best to sort of filter it through Google Translator, but it's not really the most ideal situation in sort of explaining how they were able to do what they did.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, actually, because we do have a bit of a wall, unfortunately, between ourselves and primarily the Korean guilds, even more so than the Chinese guilds, as far as communication and kind of knowing what they're doing and how they're doing it. Alex, did you have anything you wanted to say about that?
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of Korean 10-man guilds in the top 50 or so, and I think it's important to remember that they were actually testing 2 resets per week in Korea and Taiwan for Firelands. And if you actually know anything about binomial distribution, it's pretty easy to realize that this has a huge impact on the 10-man guilds particularly, because they're almost guaranteed to have beast gear from Firelands if they do it twice a week. But for the 10-man guilds that do not do alt raids or 25-mans, they might still lack some gear, and obviously it will help with the legendaries as well. It probably didn't have as much impact for the 25-mans, and as such not the top rankings, but if you stretch it to top 50, then there might be some impact. And as for the second part about bringing fairness to the race, I think that the first thing we need to do is that we need to somehow figure out how all the top guilds can communicate between themselves. And as we can clearly see from this tier, it's not communication between the EU and US. It has to be global, also include Taiwan and Korea, and that will be very challenging, I think.
Yeah, we've got a very different style of raid setup and guild setup that we're seeing in different regions. In fact, I apologize that I haven't done this sooner. I wanted to read a little bit about the way that Stars wanted to add into the discussion here. They wanted to say here that about the race being fair and sort of a fair, and they say it's very difficult. They actually bring up the fact of the difference between the dates of release of patches is something that, until Blizzard changes that, so that's something that can't really be overcome, especially from an internal perspective. And they just really hope that the design itself of the encounters and the raiding race itself are taken into consideration to give guilds a much fairer chance across the board and globally. Although I realize that's probably a bit difficult for the raiding guilds themselves to drive that. But I think there's been attempts in the past to try and make it a little bit more of a fair race, an agreement, sort of to use a sort of out-to-date term, sort of a gentleman's agreement to certain activities that you do and don't engage in. So, I would hope that would be good. But I think what's nice, though, is to see that there is that sort of a triple. In fact, they say we are glad to see a triple competition among US, EU, and Asia. So they're actually really happy to see and feel that they've actually got a place at the table as far as the race goes, which, I'm sure we all welcome that. But as far as how they're involved, how that's happening, and how everyone's choosing to set up the raid, I would think culturally, not only culturally, but also logistically, it might be difficult for guilds to follow suit, which again may impact the outcome. So yeah, maybe it's a little early to predict, but that could have an effect. Right. So something else I wanted to talk about a little bit was the content of the tier. People seem to, I did again a little bit of number crunching, looking at the time that it took guilds to go through Spine as opposed to Madness. And I don't think it's any great surprise to anybody, but on the whole, it was significantly longer time spent on Spine than it was on Madness. One example was Kin Raiders, I think, worked on Spine for, about 3 times longer than they did on Madness. And I apologize for that, guys. I can't seem to get WoW Progress to load it this time, so I can't pull up the exact days. But having said that, you could say, well, looking at in general, it took longer for most guilds to do Spine. Spine was the more difficult encounter. Is that sideways? Does that make sense? Is it because essentially Spine and Madness comprise the Deathwing encounter? So we've actually had 2 boss encounters that make up one. Do you think? What do you think about the content this time? And are you satisfied? Take away all the other stuff that went on around it, the raid itself, and I'll throw this one to you first, Grafarian. Again.
Oh, lovely! I'm so lucky.
I know.
But with regards to Spine specifically, I don't think that the fight was honestly even that difficult. Honestly, I think that everyone that went in there kind of saw what you had to do and what was really required. But, you almost felt like your guild didn't have what was needed to do that. So it was kind of like, now what? What do we have to do to kind of circumvent the fact that you need so many specific classes and so much particular DPS to be able to do the fight the way that seems quote-unquote intended or practical? And so that was really, I think, the challenge for every guild. It's kind of digging deep. to find particular classes, whether it was gearing up people, that were on the alt, or specific people that you didn't gear up before, whatever the case was, that was the real challenge with that particular encounter. Not so much the actual difficulty, but I think that actually, you'll find that the encounter is rather straightforward and systematic. Very repeatable and very straightforward. But you have to have those particular classes, and that's really what's probably stonewalling a lot of guilds that still haven't killed it to this day. It's just that it's tough to get 5 or 6 mages, 5 or 6 rogues, or several rets, or whatever you decide to use to burst down the tenants. And so that's the challenge with that particular encounter. Now, as for that versus Madness, there's no question that it had a stricter demand, and I think that Madness was just more straightforward, just because it's so similar to its normal mode counterpart, with just a few twists, and truthfully, I'd say probably rather underwhelming and easy, just because it is the final boss of the final tier of this expansion, and it's Deathwing after all, and I think that everyone would expect it to be a little bit more epic and challenging, especially after seeing Ragnaros in his heroic mode. But it is what it is, I guess, and it certainly didn't live up to our guild's expectations.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, actually, and I wanted to bring up Ragnaros in a minute as well. But Cika, did you want to add to that? How did you guys find the content?
Yeah, first I would like to talk about Spine a little bit. My opinion is that just the class hacking in general required on Spine was so different than what they've had in the past. Like, there's always going to be a class that's the best for a fight, and there's always going to be a class that's the worst for a fight, regardless of anything that's going on. And the top guilds always try to exploit that to some fashion. If they have a lot of X class, they'll bring that class just to get any minute advantage. But on Spine, it was the difference between the best and the worst was so huge that there was really no reason to even attempt it if you didn't have the correct raid makeup. And I guess that discouraged a lot of guilds. And you see a lot of guilds like hitting that wall now, and they're realizing that we actually can't kill this boss unless they nerf it. So you have guilds upon guilds, especially in the US, just dying on this boss because they can't recruit the people to bring to this fight. So I think that in regards to itself is just a terrible design mechanic. And then talking about Madness, I think we all got spoiled so much by Ragnaros that they really just didn't add any new mechanics that really spiced it up enough. I mean, if you think about Ragnaros, there was so many new mechanics, and they changed so many things about the mechanics that already existed. And then on top of that, they added an entire new phase with its own new mechanics. And then you go to Madness, and there's a parasite, and then there's some bloods that spawn in the last phase, and that's pretty much it. And there's nothing really new to work on, and I just think it was completely underwhelming. And if your guild can kill Spine, there's no reason that you can't kill Madness within a day with all the videos out by now. It's really underwhelming.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing in a way. I mean, I was thinking content, even just content-wise, this dragon that literally can just, kill you if you just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time instantly, and then the actual encounter itself has been a little bit more problematic as far as the reception goes. Dusk, how about you guys? Once you got to Spine and went through that and then moved on to Madness, did you have a similar experience?
Well, we kind of guesstimated already from PTR that Spine was going to be a complete moronic encounter. And while I like, in general, DPS-related encounters or cock blocks, if you will, this was completely, beyond stupid in terms of how it actually played out. You go there with your raid all hyped up to actually progress, and then you just hit if you can't hit the mark, then you can come back next week, or you can gear an alt, which is actually useful in the encounter. So that was really disappointing, and quite a shit design, and goes pretty far from their classical bring the player approach or whatever. Madness as well, pretty disappointing. Felt like a complete vacation after Spine. Madness, I don't know, you could play at some kind of 80% running at half speed and still kill the final boss. It was quite disappointing.
Yeah. Did that was that a similar experience for Paragon Arcs? And did you have anything to add to the content of this tier?
I don't think many people have discussed the first 5 bosses yet. I think they were pretty good, probably better than Firelands this time around. Still too easy, but you know. As for Spine, I think it vividly brought to mind Nefarian when we used some druids on it. I mean, it really felt strikingly similar for the class balance. And yeah, that's not a good thing. We didn't like the original Nefarian encounter any more than the other guilds did. And Madness, I think it's really nice to compare Madness to Ragnaros. To me, it felt like heroic Ragnaros without the last phase. I mean, it just didn't have enough new things in it. And it was really hard to actually wipe the raid there through personal fails. I mean, you got a debuff and you have 10 seconds to move. Oh, okay, anybody can do that. And I think we killed it like on the first try to phase 2 when we had everybody alive. So it was just, Madness was quite disappointing, and Spine wasn't the holy grail of design, I think.
It's a real shame. But okay, so again, I've been fiddling with the numbers and everything, looking at time frames spent. And Sko, I'm going to throw this one at you. Method spent approximately 50, let's see, you spent approximately 20 days, give or take a couple of days, or hours actually, working from Majordomo to Ragnaros Turek. And then you spent approximately 15 days going from to get through Spine, actually. So this is before Madness. So that would suggest, and actually in general, when I look at the data, guilds spent a lot more time working on Ragnaros than they did on Spine, even though Spine is generally acknowledged to be the more challenging encounter, you know, if you look at that compared to Madness. So were you, if you had to do it all over again, and we take out all the other stuff that went around the tier, like with the LFR bands and all of that, which tier would you rather do? Spend more time working on Firelands with the content of with Ragnaros, or spend less time on Dragon Soul with Deathwing? Which did you prefer?
I'd much rather spend extra time on Firelands. The reason why we spent the 20 days, I think you just said it was, on Ragnaros, was it was all about getting those 2 meteors in the last phase, which is a DPS check, but it was also a bit of a setup check for us as well, because our roster was very limited at that stage. So, like the tactic Paragon we were doing with the AoE, we felt that was really difficult for us because we were forced to basically use 3 or 4 arcane mages, I think it was. I think the boss would have died faster, like Ragnaros, if we're talking about here, if we had a more flexible roster. It wasn't just a gear check for us, it was also like a roster check. Whereas Spine, it wasn't really a roster check this time. We had mass rogues, mass mages. I really think that Spine was just a disgustingly boring fight. Just a burst DPS check, and with the LFR bans that you said not to mention, but I have to, because I mean, there was just no way we could kill it earlier than basically what we did, because the gear just wasn't. We just didn't have the DPS due to the gear issues, and I mean the fact that after the LFR ban, all the legit LFR gear was also removed from like the 30 ones we did before doing any exploits. It was just, yeah. I don't think we could have killed Spine any faster than we did, even though we had the roster this time.
Well, something I found very interesting too was, and I mentioned it earlier in the call, was the fact that you and Paragon were 18 minutes apart from each other. And I know you weren't there yourself, but considering how much you geared up, and you know, in general, before all this had happened, there'd been a lot of sort of, at least within the sort of EU side of things, the race would be between Paragon and Method, and who's radios. That's the challenge there for you guys to get first place and bump Paragon off finally. Obviously, it didn't go quite that way, but what did you think about that? You know, the fact that you were so tight with each other.
Well, I noticed that Arx was saying that Paragon took a break over Christmas. I mean, we did the same in Method. We basically killed Spine, I think it was on was it Christmas Eve? And then we just pretty much called it and took Christmas Day and Boxing Day or whatever off. But we both, well, I guess everyone knew that some guild was actually going to kill it on that final day. But yeah, I don't really know what to say, really. It didn't really feel the same as if we were pushing for some kind of world first. There was myself missing and there was some other people missing. We tried to get a raid together earlier, but there was a few delays and so on. So it's just how it is, I guess. I don't really know what else to say on that topic.
That's okay. I appreciate your honesty. So I wanted to, unless anyone wanted to add to what we were just talking about. I'm sorry?
I can just say from our viewpoint, I mean, seemed kind of similar, as Scott was saying, that it wasn't really a race for the first kill. I mean, obviously we were happy that we gained that extra rank by being one pull faster, but mainly we were just happy to actually beat the disconnect boss and the thrall bugging between platform jumps boss, and to actually be done with the content more so than beating method or something else on Madness.
Very interesting point. So moving along a bit, I wanted to talk, I did just mention earlier on as well on the call that there have been shifts in the rankings. What I didn't mention was the fact that there have been quite a few guilds that have dropped out of the race or have actually slowed down. Maybe they just decided to, haven't confirmed with some why they've slowed down, but we've seen a shift. And I'm just thinking of those that literally just in the top 20 for the Horde, Insidia, Inner Sanctum, Grafarian, the Russian guild, and Premonition, the US guild, and the first three are EU guilds. They've dropped out, and not all of these were affected. I should clarify, at least 2 of these were not affected by the ban, so it wasn't ban related for some of them. But there was various events, I think, that were going on, and it just sort of was a challenge. As anyone knows, even at the top level, it can be challenging to get a good roster of 25 raiders in a group together. So how are we surprised by this? I'm starting with you, Absalom, because I'm wondering how, if you've heard anything from Premonition and specifically, and then also just in general, how you've received so many of the sort of long-known names kind of falling out of the race.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things that happens. I mean, the game is aging, and as it ages, so does its player base. The LFR bans may have had something to do with it. Specifically, I think for guilds that may have been considering that they were on their way out, it may have exacerbated that sort of situation and caused it to happen faster. But people's lives move on, and their ability to maintain the time required of them, even in short spurts scattered through the year, becomes smaller and smaller. So, you know, I know as someone with a full-time job, I always have a moment of dread just prior to progression, aside from being like insanely exhausted. During progression, it's like no matter what I do, I know I won't be able to be as present as I would want to be for the guild or for work, you know? So it's a bit of a lose-lose situation.
Yeah, that's actually, I think everybody faces that, and I'm sure everybody can relate to that, whether they're a really casual guild or, you know, at the top of it's a very tenuous existence. So I mentioned Insidia, and it was announced on Mana Flask, I believe yesterday, that members of Insidia are going to be going over and merging with Envy, which is kind of interesting and newsworthy, I think. And Dusk, can you comment about that? What's happening, and how are you guys getting together? Is there going to be any sort of, like, you know, group building activities? Has there been any cat fights already? Is it a happy marriage?
Apparently, Nvidia wasn't able to man a 25-man roster and progress anymore on Spine, and so contacts were made, and eventually we decided that it's a good idea for all the players in both our guilds that really want to progress to have a strong roster for the upcoming expansion. And I guess it remains to see how it plays out.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, I think merging can go very well and can be challenging at times depending on the guilds and stuff. And I got to switch back to our American friends. Let me just put the elephant. You know, just identify the elephant. I've been informed by those that are more, you know, closely aligned with the American raiding scene that there's a little bit of tension sometimes between the American raiding guilds at the top. There aren't many of you, as I identified with the numbers earlier. There's only a handful of the top-level American raiding guilds, and then there seems to be a fairly big gap, you know, going further down in the rankings. Is it a little bit too close? Is there a lot of, like, you know, kind of marriages and divorces of guilds kind of coming and going and members getting poached or kind of grabbed? What's the reason for that? And do you anticipate any merging of guilds or anything there? I mean, you mentioned a few, Absalom yourself, of some that have kind of recently fallen off. Like Vigils doesn't seem to be in the race at all, or I don't see them in the race, and Premonition and so on. And then there's been others over the previous tiers. Is that why there's some tension between your guilds, or what's the Grafarian? Go for it. You know
Oh,
what you
those
like
riveted
it.
abs. Okay.
Oh, sorry, I would have answered.
That's okay. I can start, I guess, if you want.
Yeah, go for it.
I think that everybody wants to be the best. When you're all going for the same goal, there's going to be some rivalry. There's going to be some competition. You want to win, and when you don't win, you're not exactly happy about it. And I mean, I think that's where some of that comes from, I guess. But I think it's kind of a misconception, at least from my perspective, that every guild hates every other guild. US, EU, whatever it is. That's not true at all. I think everybody's kind of trying to do the same thing, and so there's some mutual respect. And that this is not easy. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it. But at the same time, like I said, everyone wants to win. Everyone's going after the same prize, I guess, or whatever, the same glory. And so there's going to be some tension, I guess. And that's just the way it is, I guess, with anything competitive.
I suppose so, but I mean, it's interesting because Cika, do you agree with that? Because it's not always what I'm being told, that there is a bit of animosity. Obviously, not every American raider or North American raider's got that animosity, but there does seem to be. It seems to get talked about more than I see with the EU guilds, for example. Am I just being told something? Or
I kind of disagree with Graf a little bit. I think there's more animosity than he leads on, just because the guilds in the U.S. all recruit from the same player base. So I know like Method and Insidia and Envy probably all recruit from the similar player base too. But and there's not that many guilds solidified in the U.S. as the top spots, mainly like Vodka, Blood Legion, Premo, and then I'd probably squeeze us somewhere in there, like in that top 4. So in the U.S., I don't know, you kind of have a lot of kids that will play the game and they're always looking for greener pastures, so you don't kill a boss where you think you should kill a boss. And you kind of just hop around between the top guilds until you find one that finishes the top of the tier, or that's at the end of the tier. They did the best, and you stick with that guild for a while, and then that guild kind of falls off. You just jump to one of the other 4 guilds. So you kind of have, in each of these guilds, you have people that have been in every guild. Like I know there's people that raided with Exodus that are in Blood Legion, and there's people that have raided with Exodus that are in Vodka. And there's people that have raided with those guilds that are in our guild. So there's always like tension going around. You want to beat the guild that may have got a couple of your members, or members that have joined from that guild want to beat their previous guild. And then you have the whole issue of like a lot of the top guilds. Since we have all these members that interchange, a lot of members. You have a guild that forgets to delete someone's forum access. You got moles in each guild. Every guild seems to know what every other guild is doing, and there's always like people hunting around on your world of logs, and you gotta watch that stuff, and it just produces more tension, I think.
Very good. And Absalom, how about you guys? Are you aware of any tension?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with a lot of the things that Cika said. There are a dwindling number of American guilds that remain at the top. The ones that are there have kind of existed for quite some time now. So there's a lot of history that's developed between all of the guilds, and we all speak the same language. So there are definitely less regional divides as well. And I think part of it, aside from the actual tension that exists between guilds too, is that they're all guilds that are part of one of the larger subscription bases for WoW. So you see, a very few high-end American guilds, and then you have a very large subscription base talking about all those guilds. And for sure that increases perhaps the perceived tension at times, because you have a lot of people on the forums talking between the different guilds and talking about them.
Very good. Well, we'll just we'll keep an eye on that and see how it goes. Well, I wanted to. I found a link. Someone actually sent a link to me of a newspaper article from one of the top Finnish newspapers, and it was in Finnish, so I used my Google Translate to translate it. I was later given a much better quality translation, but in this article, they were basically describing how Paragon, the up until then top-ranked raiding guild in the world, the Finnish top-ranked raiding guild, had fallen in its slot. Lost its first place spot to the Korean raiding guild, Kin Raiders. And Alex, I'm asking you this because I know you guys do get some press, but in general, were you a bit surprised by that? And have you been do they follow you in the news there in Finland?
Well, not really. I mean, we've had the odd opportunity to do some radio or a short TV clip or something, but mainly that's just. I mean, the article was in the biggest newspapers online site. We just had a pretty good laugh about it. Just typical Finnish news. I mean, they're not interested as long as things are going great, but just when there's just when somebody loses or there's some slight drama, then they're instantly on it. So it was worth a good laugh, but not much else.
Yeah, I mean, and does that? I mean, has anyone else gotten any sort of news or press or any information or sort of attention about this race or previous races? And do we think that this is a sign of a change where people are actually paying attention to the race? So, has anyone else had that experience? I haven't seen too much covered in the UK, but I wasn't sure if there's been anything on stateside or anything like that.
I think we had a guy called Zuzo in Black Temple. I don't know if you've heard this before, Ladan, but
yes, I have. Yeah. But please tell everybody the story.
He received both glaives, and he sold his account to some guy in Abu Dhabi or something, and for like €7,000. So he got like some BBC article online as well, but that's about it.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point actually, and I think Alex just sort of Sko just illustrated that, and Alex just kind of touched on it, the fact that a lot of times the media is interested more in the negative things that are going on, but it's very interesting. And I'll be interested to see if Paragon's able to reclaim its first place spot in Tier 14, if the newspaper will test that theory out, Alex, and see if they actually report the positive results in the news. So do let us know if that changes. So, but as far as the future goes, what do you guys think about the next tier? What would need to be differently? What would need to be handled differently in order for us to perhaps not see a repeat of Tier 13? Aside from obviously don't have a bug or an exploit and something like the LFR. What do you think Blizzard could do, for example, to make it a better tier, both content and also just the structure of the race? And I'm going to pick on Dusk first for that from Envy. What do you think you would like to see happen going forward based on what's happened in the current tier?
I think I answered this question some time ago, and I believe the answer was about communication. I'm not so sure Blizzard are interested in having these top guilds destroying their content prematurely, and I don't know if they want more from us or help or testing or something. They need to invite us, be it with communication or testing content or something. I think that might lead to a better game, but yeah. It's hard to say as well, because I don't want to do their job for them for free. And yeah, it's kind of a hard question to answer.
No,
but I'll leave it at that.
Very good, and a fair response. How about Sko? What do you think?
In terms of making it better, I mean, I'd like to see something done about the farming that you can do, like having to farm LFR like 35 times, just 1 or 2 characters at a time to maximize the gear drops, and then having to do it on normal as well after Hork is just really, really boring. I hope they can put something in that is going to stop you from wasting days on LFR in the normal mode week.
And Grafarian, did you want to add to that? Or?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like Scott said, I think that the farming thing is definitely teased. That, I know for me personally, that ruined this tier. I hated running LFR countless times, and I was in for pretty much every run, and so. And it's it really is, it ruins the content, I feel like. And so that they need to address, I feel like that's just a big thing for top guilds at least. And, I don't know how they're going to do that because it's just such a challenge, I guess. And I don't even know if they really care too much about the race, quote unquote. But, hopefully they can do something to make sure that the quality of life for top guilds in those regards is a little bit easier. But I think the biggest thing is, when we're on PTR and we're kind of working with some of the developers, they don't listen to all our feedback. I think is the big problem, and it's usually on good merit, and usually it makes sense. And a lot of times, it's to improve either the encounter or a particular aspect of the game, or things that we can see coming a mile away. And so that's the big problem. I feel like is they don't take all our feedback into consideration and really act on it and implement it before it goes live. It's usually too late and inconsequential by the time anything's done, if at all.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. In fact, I'll just add in here when Stars kind of chimed in on this particular area, like what could be looking forward with the raiding race and what they would like to see. They just said that they hope Blizzard can design some hard enough encounters so that everyone has a chance. And I think that, again, relating back to the sort of timing of the release of content, and then also that they hope for bug-free and hard enough heroic encounters. So obviously that's a nice wish, and I'm sure everybody joins them in that. So, Cika, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that with the introduction of LFR, I'm not quite sure why Blizzard made Dragon Soul normal so easy, and I'm sure everyone can agree that Dragon Soul normal mode was so much easier than Fireland's normal mode. And I feel like if they're going to introduce LFR to let more people see the bosses, they should make normal modes more challenging, at least on par with Fireland's normal modes. And then maybe they can start making hard modes, like the first bosses, a little more difficult. I mean, it'd be nice to have a content patch where we had, instead of just racing to the very last boss and then the race begins, it'd be nice to, actually have some sort of tiered progression, like, there's kind of a wall at the third boss, then maybe at the fifth boss, then at the last boss. Instead, it's just get to the last boss if you're if you're good at all, and then basically just sit there for a while. And it just seems kind of, I don't understand why, if they want to let everyone see the content, they have 2 raid tiers now that are extremely simple that anyone can pug and complete, and then they have this hard mode tier that now they're just slowly making it easier and easier too. I don't understand.
Yeah, it'd be nice to get a little bit more of sort of perspective into their thinking, about why their plan there. So, Ux, what do you think?
Besides the things the guys already said, I think that they really need to incorporate class balance into their encounter design a lot more than they have right now. I mean, starting with Grafarian for Cataclysm, obviously they hadn't really thought it out that, hey, if one ability is magnified 1,000-fold or 10-fold or whatever, I mean, that's not going to be very good for balance. They've fixed that after we'd killed the boss. Okay. Then on Firelands, nobody really took advantage of it, but I feel that if you had available a number of demo warlocks for Ragnaros, it would really have helped on the encounter. They were doing so much more damage on the third phase than any other class, simply because they were very good at burn DPS with the Doom Guard. And now we got Spine, which is yet another example. You have about 20 seconds to actually DPS something, and it's only about being able to do maximum damage during that time. So all of these encounters are very good examples of how it wasn't really, I don't feel it's very well thought out at the time of designing that encounter, that okay, maybe our class balance isn't exactly cut out for this type of encounter. So if they fix that and start thinking about those things beforehand, then I feel that the content will be much better than right now.
Yeah. So I wanted to go into the notion of the domination at the top of by Asian guilds. We've got, as I mentioned earlier, sort of a move of more Asian guilds onto the scene. There's been a modest increase in the top 25. A lot of the top ranked guilds that are Korean tend to be 10-man raiding guilds, as we've discussed. But there is a change in the scene, and I actually asked Stars about that, and I just asked them, that this is sort of an unprecedented experience, and is this really the way that they see things happening? And They brought up actually a point that I think is really interesting, and it's been mentioned a few times. There was around late October, Blizzard announced that they were going to do double resets on the heroic, the raids were resetting twice each week. So they did do this in October. They announced it. It was a blue post. None of this was sort of underhanded or unofficial, but it wasn't really thought about at the time. But it's been speculated that that had a positive effect on the raiding race, not by a lot of people, but people have speculated that. And this is what they said about this. They said, many people believe that the double cooldown in Firelands gave Asian guilds a huge advantage, which is not correct. We got the 2 times cooldown on October 25th, but most members had all that they needed out of the Firelands gear before that. Even for legendaries, they had already had 15 of them at the time. So they feel that ranking in Tier 13 does not mean that Asian guilds are better than the EU or US, and that no king rules forever. That's what they said, or queen. They will not be surprised if any EU or US or Asian guilds pop out in the future race again. So I think what they were trying to say, I think, is actually quite reasonable, and that yes, obviously that could have had an effect, but from their perspective, it really didn't make that much of a difference. I wanted to see if any of you had any thoughts about that. Does anyone have any, whether they agree with what Stars has said? Arx, what do you think?
I previously said that it might have had impact on the 10-man race, and I still stand behind that. I mean, obviously 25-man guilds can put in the extra effort. They can just do an alt raid. So I really doubt that it had that much impact on the 25-man environment. As for if the Asian guilds are here to stay, I think that it's very hard to say based on this tier, since Spine definitely played to their strengths. I mean, I think they have quite a lot of characters to pick from with quite good gear. So on a fight that requires a strong comp and good gear, it's going to be very good for them. I mean, they've always been near the top, but it's very hard to say with the bans and the type of encounters that we saw here. It's very possible that they'll be number 1 again when Pandaria comes, but yeah.
Yeah. And well, I wanted to see if anyone had any thoughts about the impact of holidays. In fact, that's something else that Stars brought up, was that, it would be nice. And they mentioned this. I interviewed them about a year and a half ago, and they said that, when, for example, ICC came out, that was right in the middle of the Chinese New Year. And if anyone's been in China, you know that China basically shuts down and people travel great distances going home, and they don't have the same internet infrastructure, and people generally just can't raid. And so they really missed out during that period, they felt, because they felt perhaps that Blizzard didn't consider the fact that they might have a major national holiday. Like we have Christmas, but obviously they also release content, anticipation of something like Christmas, which also affected a lot of guilds. And I know that quite a few of you shut down for 2 or 3 days. Did that sort of affect things for you, Grafarian, with vodka? Did you guys shut down over Christmas? And do you think that your rankings might have been different if you'd kept raiding?
Well, I think that we never really raid on the holidays that are the major ones, and I think that's just a practical thing, because people want to see their families, spend time with them, and travel and things like that. And it's just not realistic to get everybody. And I don't want to say and make an excuse that it would have changed our ranking. I mean, it might have shifted us 1 or 2 spots maybe, but honestly, I think overall, it wasn't a big deal. I think that it's just a matter of some guilds did raid on the holidays and others didn't. And I mean, I guess it's just what you could muster up with your raiding roster, but. I guess it'd be kind of idealistic to want everyone to not raid during the major holidays. I don't know.
Yeah, although you guys did, Absalom. You had a 24th kill, so what was the story there?
Yeah, we did take some time off during the holidays. We didn't raid on the day of Christmas Eve. It wasn't anything that we had planned particularly far in advance. It was just sort of on the 22nd and the 23rd. We got a feeling for how available people would be, and then made a decision at that point about whether we would raid Christmas Day during the evening and also on the subsequent day. it's the sort of thing where we just kind of play it by ear and see how available people are, and if they are and we can form a reasonable raid to make some progress, then we'll do it. It's no different from what the situation was like during Tier 11 when Cataclysm was launched. All the progression happened during the holidays as well.
It's a very good point. So I suppose on some level, if I were to be a devil's advocate, it might be difficult for Blizzard to ever perfectly anticipate every single type of holiday that might be experienced by anyone anywhere in the world, just to make sure that the rating is fair. So it's always going to be a bit of a challenge. But interesting to see how people accommodate and work around those. About the tier itself, I didn't actually ask any of you guys. I just wondered, just for fun, what was your favorite boss in this particular raid tier? How about you, Dusk? What was your favorite boss encounter in Dragon Soul?
I would have to say, even though it was shit, I would have to say Madness was my favorite because it was the end of it, with the disappointment of the bans and the spine encounter.
Okay. How about you, Cika? What was your favorite boss encounter? I'm also afraid to ask everybody now.
I like that. I can't remember the name because they all have the same model. It's like that slime boss where the slimes come in from the outside. I think that's Yorsage. That boss is pretty cool. Pre-nerf when the HP was like ridiculous. So it seemed like a pretty tough DPS race, and kind of had to play around with which slimes to kill and which ones you could let in, and get to teach your healers how to heal it without blowing people up. So that one was pretty fun. And then I would have to agree though. I think Madness was really good, but just that it was an end boss kind of left a sour taste in my mouth. So it was a good fight, but not a good end boss fight. So I'm going to go with Yorsage.
All right. Anyone else want to add in about their favorite boss encounter or least favorite? Or
I quite like Gunship, but the 10-man version of Gunship. The 25-man was a bit too easy.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you guys did get that experience. In fact, Alex, I'm surprised you guys didn't redo your test. You did it with Ragnaros, where you did 25 and then you did 10-man to sort of do a comparative analysis. Why didn't you do that with this one? And incidentally, what was your favorite boss encounter?
I'll start with the favorite boss. I mean, I completely agree with Cika. I mean, Madness was the best fight in the tier, but it wasn't the worthy end boss. And so your Sai is my favorite, considering the position in the instance as well. As for the test, I mean, we simply haven't really had the energy after the disappointment of this tier to go back there and do the 10-man. I mean, it hasn't felt worth it. We already went up the spine, so I'm probably going to write something about it, like when I actually have time from my work. So we'll see. We'll see if we still do it in 10-man, like just to view the madness as well. But just everybody kind of wanted to relax a bit, so not enough energy to go do the 10-man after.
So did you guys come to the conclusion that exploits are bad? That they're not worth? Do you think now that people will no longer sort of engage in the widespread exploits like what happened because of the cost, not just to the race, but also the cost of the effect on the guilds themselves? Go ahead, Alex. I'm going to ask you first.
I'm actually not that optimistic anymore about this being like a really long-term effect of deterring exploiting, because despite Blizzard saying that double looting a boss on the same reset or on the same week is never okay. I mean, we all know that the guild transfer has been bugging, and some guilds have been using that to reset their lockout and do heroics multiple times per week. And I'm really not blaming the guilds, but it's kind of a double standard to first like get on a really high horse and say that this is never allowed, and then just turn their backs the next moment. So to me, it starts looking like this was a one-time thing which is really not a good thing, because I think most people were hoping for a harder line on exploits in the future, but now I'm really afraid that that won't happen. They'll still turn a blind eye to most exploits. I'm hoping that won't be the case, but I'm not really optimistic anymore.
Yeah, it's sometimes the inconsistency can get the better of us. Dusk, what do you think?
I just wanted to add that I approve of the fact that something was actually done with the LFR abuse. However, we don't really know what the future has in store for us. We know that, for example, throwing bombs on Lich King is not so accepted. We know that you can't loot twice from a boss, but that's all we know at this point. And until they bring consistency or invite to some sort of communication, we don't know. I'm sure we're gonna reach a gray area again where you can go on an abusive path or behavior, and maybe it will be worth the risk again. So I believe that consistency is something that's missing.
Yeah. Absalom, do you concur or?
I concur to a degree. I feel like consistency, especially with the LFR versus server transferring and getting additional resets, is definitely something that needs to be addressed. I think if it's addressed, I think Blizzard will respond. I feel like in the past, for certain server transfers, it's actually retained the lockout and you weren't actually able to reset. But I do remember hearing that there were certain guilds that did take advantage of that during this progression race. Ultimately, I feel like whether or not, or regardless of what Blizzard does and how they react, and I thought that they reacted appropriately to LFR, guilds are going to exploit if they want to exploit. Even if Blizzard responds to exploits with perma-banning accounts, people will still come back with either another account or re-level and continue to do the actions if that's what they want to do. You see exploitative actions occur every day, from botting to account hacking. So if a guild wants to exploit raid content bugs, which I think it's idealistic to expect that tiers ever ship without any bugs, then they'll be able to do it. So yes, I do agree that we need better consistency from Blizzard, but sort of along the lines of what Arx was saying, I feel like we as a community also have an onus on ourselves to set an example and to choose not to follow certain exploits if we deem them to be inappropriate.
Yeah. And incidentally, what was your favorite boss encounter, Absalom?
Not the most popular opinion. I tend to look at things from a tanking perspective. So in spite of like the odd class stacking that happened, I really enjoyed tanking on Spine. I thought just dealing with bloods and kiting them around as a prop paladin was interesting, to say the least.
Very good. Nice to hear that. So, Cika, did you want to weigh in on this topic from Exodus?
Yeah. Since we're the exploiting guild, everyone knows us as, figured I'd mention something about exploits. I think that now, since LFR ban, this is going to be the benchmark now. So if a guild finds a way to somehow exploit a fight, they're going to go, okay, will this exploit turn out to be as widespread as the LFR exploit? Because if it is, we know that we're going to get banned. If it's not, we're probably not going to get banned, because if no one knows about it, Blizzard's not going to do anything. The only reason they banned so many people for LFR is because there was so many people doing it, they had to send a message. But the majority, like the huge majority of any exploits that these guilds at this level do are never known about by anyone. No one knows about them except other top guilds, and other top guilds will usually try to ticket it and try to get it overturned, but it never really happens. So it'll still happen. There's no way it's going to stop. That's just my opinion on it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Grafarian, I didn't get to ask you what your favourite boss encounter was. So what did you like the best out of Tier 13?
Sure. Just before, I'll tell you, it was your Sarge, like I think a couple people already mentioned. And actually, we also liked Warlord as well. Or War Master, actually, I think is what it was. But now, with regards to the exploit thing, I think that a big factor, I don't know if it's just me that feels this way, but it's how widespread it is. If it's not really well known, if a lot of people aren't doing it, there's usually no consequence. And I think that's where it really does fall, like Ab said, on individuals to be like, this is the line, and we're not going to cross it, or we are. And that's why I just don't think it'll ever be something that's completely removed from the rating scene, unless like I said, an overarching party that's cracks down on it and says, if you're caught cheating clearly and we can prove it, then you're going to be it's going to impact your ranking or your status in the rating community. But otherwise, I think that really ultimately it's always going to be a part of it, because not everybody knows about every exploit, and if it's not widespread, typically Blizzard hasn't been like, all right, let's take action on this. I mean, LFR was a good example of a lot of people were doing it, and there's a lot of outcry from the public community, and so they felt it was definitely warranted, and I think rightfully so, that something should be done. Whereas, if, I don't know, just to use a dumb example, I guess, if, we, LOS a mechanic or something, and, maybe that's not intended, but it works, we probably won't get banned for that, or, there won't be a huge outcry because a lot of people won't be exposed or know too much about it, I guess.
Nice point. Did you want to add to that, Alex?
Yeah, I've talked about this before, but I think that it's really challenging to draw the line, actually. Like, okay, everybody knew that the LFR thing was an exploit, and it's a very good thing that it was that people received bans for. But what about things like soaking the spirits on Lich King, which literally everybody did? And later we found out that, okay, that was actually not intended. One of the developers said that at BlizzCon to one of our members, and it came kind of out of the blue that, what? You weren't meant to soak those? I mean, it's unintended, but clearly that's not an exploit. Then you have stuff like Ragnaros, the triangle in phase 4. Okay, it's maybe a bit further to an exploit. Sounds like a clever tactic, maybe not intended, but still, I wouldn't classify it as an exploit. Then you have stuff like Grafarian, which some people still think that was an exploit, but I mean, everything was working normally. It was just a retarded encounter. And I'd still say that there was no exploit there. So where do you actually draw the line? It's not as simple as some people make it out to be. And as long as we have this kind of gray area stuff, we will have guilds that some people think are exploiting and some people think that aren't exploiting. But I hope that we can at least agree on some things that everybody thinks is exploiting, that we won't use those.
Yeah, it would be nice to sort of see where things go from here and see if we sort of engage the bigger community. In fact, I think that was a very interesting point that you all made about the fact that with the LFR, it was a more wide scale, and the wider community got interested in it. So that kind of perhaps drove the decision to react. But I suppose we'll just have to wait and see, and then see how things go. I think we're sort of wrapping up here now. So I wanted to thank you all for coming. I think one thing I just wanted to add though from Stars. I just asked them if they had any other thoughts about the race in general that they wanted to share, and I'm going to sort of let you gentlemen let me know if you'd like to also add anything to our discussion that we haven't talked about. But what they wanted to say was they thought Kinraider's success was quite exciting, and they felt that more Asian guilds coming into this playground or the race makes the race to world first better recognized, and I really do agree with that. And they also hope that the EU and US guilds can get over from what happened in this tier and regain the honor in the future. So I think that's very, very poignantly said, and I think that's also quite sweet. They want you back in the race, and I think they want your honor to be restored. I think that's a very, very magnanimous gesture from the world-ranked number 2 guild to the rest of you out there that are participating. So do any of you want to add to anything, any other thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners before we wrap things up, or anything else that we didn't quite get into today? Anybody? Okay, go ahead, Cika.
I just wanted to say that I hope in the future that, we talked about kind of how a lot of the U.S. guilds have had a falling out, and there's not many left. I hope that more U.S. guilds step up to the plate if there's people listening, and It'd be nice to have maybe 10 U.S. guilds that were really competing for that top spot, or maybe even like 5. But it's just it's sad to see a lot of guilds not living up to what you expect them to. It's sad not having it's like, oh, if Blood Legion and Vodka kill it, all right, we're gonna kill it then, and that's gonna be it. There's really no more race for us to try to go faster, because no matter what we do, we're probably gonna kill it ahead of the rest of the U.S. guilds, because they don't put in the effort, they don't raid the hours, and they don't put in the effort for it. And I just wish they would. That's all.
Very nicely said. And actually, what's interesting there, and I just again say this out to our listeners in the US servers, even though there has been a drop in activity amongst the 25-man raiding guilds, for some reason the US 10-man raiding guilds haven't really engaged in the race at the same level as the Korean raiding guilds and the EU raiding guilds. We currently have I think when I did some math, I've been writing notes furiously. Here we go. Tier 13 of the 10-man guilds in the top 22, and I did this on Friday. 4 of them are from Korean servers and 4 of them from EU servers. In fact, there's a French server guild and some German server guilds that do very well in 10-man raiding. That's a wonderful opportunity, but unfortunately there's no US guilds involved in the 10-man race. And then the same thing with the EU guilds. There may be a decrease in the 25-man guilds, but there's always an opportunity there. And in fact, there's thousands upon thousands of 10-man raiding guilds out there. So it could be a very exciting race, a dynamic one. And the Korean raiding guilds love raiding a 10-man level, so it can be just as exciting for people to kind of get into. So, right. I want to thank everybody for being with us. We've got Arcs from Paragon, Absalom from Blood Legion, Cika from Exodus, Grafarian from Vodka, Dusk from Envy, Sko from Method, and Stars with Crusher kind of writing the responses from Stars. Thank you all very much for being with us today. I really do appreciate it. I do hope that everyone found this to be interesting and useful. We'll probably do another podcast a bit further down the road as we start getting ready for, as we see more information about how the race in general has been for Tier 13. But for me, just to sum up, I think we do see some interesting shifts in the rankings. A lot of the same players are involved. Obviously, there's been some dropouts, but it'll remain to be seen if this is a more permanent shift when we get to Tier 14, or if this is just an outcome of what I've been lovingly calling the unlucky Tier 13. So thanks again, guys. Wish you all a chance to say farewell to our listeners right now. So you could say something nice.
Thanks a lot for inviting us, and thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Hear, hear.